by Rabbi Silver and Paul Golan. It is on you now.
Great, thank you very much. And that was Katie Ryder, by the way, who is the National Coordinator of Jews for Secular Democracy. My name is Paul Golan. I am the Executive Director of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. And Jews for Secular Democracy is our pluralistic initiative organizing around separation of church and state through a Jewish perspective. So some of you have come in through Society for Humanistic Judaism. That is a specific denomination. We are not pluralistic, but this initiative is pluralistic. We bring the full gamut of Jewish expression to these issues, and there are many issues related to separation of church and state, and we look forward to getting into that. So this is the first time you're ever joining one of our Jews for Secular Democracy webinars. Thank you very much. We will keep you posted about upcoming events, and we are really looking to organize people to take action locally. Much of this battle is now on the state level or even on the local level. Today, we're going to be talking about a state level battle. Your state has church-state separation issues, even if you're not in a battleground state. I don't even know if we can call Florida a battleground state anymore, but there are battleground states, there are red states, there are blue states, all of them. I live in New York. You would think it's a solid blue state. We've got separation of church-state issues that our cohort here in New York is addressing. So we hope you'll get involved, but if you're just here to watch, we're also happy to have you as well. So today, we are particularly honored to have with us as guest Rabbi Barry Silver. He is an abortion, animals rights, civil rights lawyer, as well as a rabbi. He founded Cosmic Judaism, which unites religion and science to offer an inspirational view of spirituality, whose highest religious mandate is to unite all people to save our planet and its inhabitants by building bridges of understanding. His lawsuit against Operation Rescue, representing the National Organization for Women, ended abortion clinic blockades, and he is currently suing Governor Ron DeSantis to defeat the 15-week abortion ban in Florida. He is the rabbi of Congregation Va-Dor in Boynton Beach, Florida, which he co-founded with his father, Rabbi Samuel Silver, and he served in the Florida Legislature and was named the most effective environmental legislator by the Sierra Club. He was named Consumer Champion by Florida's largest consumer group and the Victims' Rights Champion by the Black Police Officers of America. And there is so much more on his impressive resume that I could use up the whole webinar going through it, but I think that gives you a taste of the remarkable things that he's done so far as both a lawyer and a rabbi. And so I'm going to get into the questions. We have come up with a couple of questions that we want to throw to Rabbi Silver, and then we will definitely leave time at the end for you all to ask questions that haven't been asked yet. So pay attention and don't repeat the questions, but definitely write your questions in the chat, and we will, we have staff who are going to record them, and we will try our best to answer all those questions. So first, Rabbi Silver, thank you so much for being here. First of all, tell us what is happening around religious freedom in Florida, and why was it important for you as a rabbi and a lawyer to take a stand?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for allowing me to share a few thoughts with you about this very, very important issue. And thank you for that wonderful introduction, which you recited just the way my wife wrote it for you. I appreciate that. As a rabbi and a lawyer, it's not easy. Somebody approached me the other day and said they were wronged by the neighbor. I didn't know if I should tell them to sue them or forgive them. So I wear two yarmulkes. But let me share with you why I thought it was important. Ever since I got the inkling that Roe v. Wade would be overturned, I recognized as an abortion rights attorney that this was going to have a devastating effect along with everybody else. But I realized there's a plan B. Okay, even without the right of privacy, the religious freedom aspect is extremely strong, very powerful argument. And it hadn't been raised in the past, mostly because it didn't need to be, because the right of privacy was doing perfectly okay. When that went by the wayside, we needed a plan B, and the religious freedom aspect is a very, very powerful tool. I believe equally as strong as the right of privacy, and they both, right of privacy shouldn't have been overturned, but when it was, then that's why I recognize it. and I took action to file a lawsuit in order to try to vindicate the rights of Jews and the rights of everybody else who have all different religious views that are implicated by this law. This law criminalizes Judaism. And the law is very vague in quite a few respects, one of which the law says that anyone who actively participates in an abortion, which runs afoul of this law, this new law, can be sent to jail and fined. So there's criminal penalties. It doesn't define actively participates. We lawyers call that a chilling effect. What it does is, because you don't really know what's covered and what's not, you're just so scared. You're like, I'm not going to get involved in all of this. You know, I'll just steer clear of it. Just like the exceptions. It says, well, there's an exception if the life of the mother is imminently threatened and the doctor does the abortion, then he's okay. But how does a doctor know what that means? Imminently threatened, or if the child is going to die imminently, what does that mean? Like within a week, a month? We don't really know. It's a chilling effect. But the actively participates means that if I were to counsel a woman that she should have an abortion according to Jewish law, which I just did within the last month, and she has the abortion, and they say, why'd you do that? And she says, well, Silver told me to. I could be hauled off into jail. It's classic chilling effect. It's a violation of religious freedom. There's no way this should even pass the smell test. But because judges are appointed by people who have a political axe to grind, we haven't even got a hearing yet. So you just don't know when you go to court what's going to happen and what malicious, malevolent influences are going to take place. I will tell you this also before your next question. There are aspects of this litigation that are unfortunate. And I hesitate to bring up things about different groups or attempt to work together. But I am very candid, and I will answer any question honestly. And if anybody is upset about it, I do apologize. But there are things I think that should be told about this whole episode and how we can more effectively work together.
Well, you said a very powerful phrase in what criminalizing Judaism. And so switching over to your rabbi hat, I guess, what do you mean by that as far as what does Judaism say about abortion as you understand?
Okay. Well, you know, the joke is that the only thing two Jews can agree on is what the third should give to charity. But one thing that's pretty clear, and it's kind of weird, is that Jews across the board seem to be fairly united on the fact that life, according to Jewish law, begins at birth. And it's one thing that really unites us. Now, not everybody shares that view, but of course, the reform progressive movements of Judaism are very pro-choice. And I also have to say, I should have said right off the bat, I have tremendous respect for humanistic Judaism. I mean, my yarmulke is off to people who will just clearly say, I don't believe in supernatural beings, and I think it's all nonsense. I say that, but I have great respect for humanistic Judaism. I think you're very courageous and you're following a logical path. And those people who follow an illogical path are path illogical. And so I think it's really important that we support it. And Jews for Secular Democracy. So let me just share with you about Judaism. I don't take the Torah literally at all. I don't think it was written by a divine being. It was written by people doing the best they could. But if you look at the Torah, you'll see Exodus 20:21 says if two men are fighting, and a woman bystander is injured, then the one responsible pays a fine. If she dies, the one responsible pays with his life, because it says nefesh tachat nefesh, a life for a life. And then it says if she miscarries, the one responsible pays a fine. Now it just said a life for a life, but the miscarriage is not penalized with a life. Therefore, the fetus can't possibly be considered a life. There's no way around it. So any fundamentalist that says, oh yes, I believe that the Bible is God's word. Well, God doesn't think that the fetus is a life. So they might be opposed to abortion, and they might say that life begins at conception, but it's a misconception to base that on the Bible. In fact, the Bible, Christian and Jewish, has no prohibition at all against abortion. They knew about it. They penalized all types of behaviors, but they didn't penalize this one because the Bible is pro-choice. There's no other way to read it. None. Now,
And
if
in
you
fact,
also get,
I was going to say, when Roe v. Wade first passed, many of the denominations in Christianity were for it, who are now, so adamantly against it.
absolutely. And by the way, a lot of Christians, a lot of them are still very much pro-choice and right with us, marching with us, as you know. There's also Genesis 2:7, which said God fashioned human beings, and it uses the word yitzah, like a potter does with clay. He fashioned them, and then it says, and then he breathed the breath of life into the man, and he became a nefesh chayim, a living being, which according to Jewish law, again, I don't take it literally, but according to Jewish law, what this means is that we equate the onset of breathing, which takes place at birth, with the beginning of life. So you could say birth and breath are synonymous. Same thing, Ezekiel and the dry bones. Now you go to Maimonides, okay? So you say, well, what about the Orthodox? Well, Maimonides is the icon, and he's also a physician, so he knows a little bit about what he's talking about here. He said, Ubal yach imo, the fetus is part of the mother. The fetus was viewed as part of the mother's body. That's why you pay a fine if you damage the fetus, because the fetus was not considered a separate life. It was considered part of the mother until the greater part of the fetus emerges from the woman, or in some circles, the head emerges. But until birth, it's considered not a human life. Maimonides also said, and Jewish law also says, a woman is not just entitled to an abortion to save her life or her emotional well-being. She's required to have it. She cannot martyr herself. She can't say, I'm going to sacrifice my life for the fetus. She's not allowed to, according to Jewish law. So people think, well, the Orthodox, they're okay with all these laws, right? No, because the Orthodox, they don't need laws telling them when they can abort and when they can't. They have their own Jewish law. The last thing they need is for a fundamentalist Christian to come along and say, well, actually, your law is now superseded. You can only have an abortion, not according to Jewish law, but according to our misinterpretation of Jewish law. That's all you can. Why is it then that the Orthodox have been rather silent on this? Why aren't they jumping up and down and screaming? It's very obvious, because they're in bed with the fundamentalist Christians, because the fundamentalist Christians support Israel, and the fundamentalist Christians support their vouchers and all this other conservative nonsense, and so they don't want to mess with them. So they don't like it, but they're pretty silent about it. But yes, Jews across the board believe that life begins at birth. Scientifically, if you want to look at science, there's a phrase, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, which is a fancy way of saying the development of the fetus parallels the evolution of the human being. Now, if you don't believe in evolution, this makes no sense to you. And the concept, the theory has been discredited somewhat in absolute terms, but as a general proposition, the fetus starts out as a singular cell, like an amoeba, and then it's in water, and then it has gills, and then it has a tail, and it looks like an amphibian, a reptile, a mammal. It has a coat of hair, which it gets rid of. It has a tail, which it gets rid of. It follows evolution. So it's not a human being. It's clearly not a human being in the early stages. And to say that to call the fetus a preborn baby is like calling you and me a pre-dead corpse. It's confusing the future potential with the actual. It's calling an egg a chicken, or an acorn an oak tree, or punishing someone with arson if they burn down the blueprints to a house. It makes no sense, but the fundamentalist religions make no sense anyway, so to them, it all seems very logical.
Right, and your point about the Orthodox, or really a fundamentalist approach to religion in terms of like school vouchers, it touches on how all of this really does overlap and directly speaks to breaking down that wall between separation of church and state. That okay, they're going to be quiet on abortion because they want the vouchers. It's all about the separation of church and state. So
it's all
Katie,
political. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Katie, go ahead and
Can
jump in with the next
I
question.
ask, as a complete layman, can you explain what your lawsuit challenges. I know you had said to me before it challenges the RFRA law in Florida. Can you explain
Yeah.
how and why and what that means?
Sure. The lawsuit is based on two aspects of the First Amendment dealing with religion. There's the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. Our lawsuit, and by the way, when I filed the lawsuit, the first thing I did, I sent it around to everybody in the country that I could think of, all the groups that said, use this. Here's a template. Improve upon it, make it better. But they all tend to, all the litigation around abortion rights tend to follow these two aspects: Establishment Clause, Free Exercise Clause. What that means is that you cannot establish one religion as the law of the land for all religions. And that's what Jews for a Secular Democracy is all about. And it's what the founding fathers were all about. James Madison said, the wall of separation is important so that the soil of America is not soaked in blood like the soil of Europe. They saw a horror show when the religion and the government united. They wanted to keep it separate. So that's the Establishment Clause. You cannot establish a religion or a part of one religion, like a fundamentalist view of Christianity, as the law of the land. That's what this does. It says from now on, everyone must follow a fundamentalist Christian or Catholic approach to abortion rights. And our law from this religion is now the religion for everybody in this area. You can't do it. The other aspect of it is the Free Exercise Clause. And it's similar. It's that every person has the right to freely exercise their religion. If my religion is, and my religion says about abortion that I'm entitled to an abortion up till the time of birth, and this law is saying, no, you can't have it or you'll be thrown in jail, I cannot exercise my rights as a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim or anything else, because if I try to exercise my rights to my religion, I'm put in jail. So it's a violation of the Free Exercise Clause. Now that's the First Amendment. Now what RFRA does is it puts teeth on the First Amendment. It's really no different than the First Amendment. It just gives it more enforcement power and more ability to champion those things in court.
And the way it kind of got distorted, though, is the Free Exercise Clause was kind of supposed to be a shield against the government telling you what you can and can't do religiously. And then it has become a sword by which the government is protecting people who use their religion to discriminate. I mean, we just saw like this Coach Kennedy case where the Supreme Court said it's his free exercise to pray like right after a football game with his students, right? Public school football students. It would be damaging his free exercise of religion, whereas the students' right to, all of the pressure that you have as a football player to appease your coach. Could you imagine, being Jewish or atheist or anything other than what that coach is on that team and saying, nah, I'm going to pass. I'll just wait over here while you guys go do that. The immense pressure on those students, and instead the court sided with, the religious fundamentals.
Well, you're exactly right. You raise a really good point. And when I filed this lawsuit, some of my colleagues and allies said, wait, you can't use that RFRA thing. That's being used to support Christianity. Now, here's the interesting aspect of this. It has been used repeatedly to allow Christians to inflict their religion on others. As you say, I'm a Christian, so I have the right to pressure other people. This is going to be an interesting test. Can RFRA be used by someone other than a Christian in order to enforce their rights? Now I ask you, which is a greater infringement on your religious freedom? A football coach who's not allowed to go out and proselytize with a prayer and a football game, or a woman who is trying to exercise control over her reproductive system and make a decision that could actually cause her life and death because the law, which is more of an infringement if you can't do it? It's obvious, but the law has always favored RFRA for Christians. We're now going to find out, we're going to take the fight to them. We're going to say, okay, is RFRA only for Christians, or does it apply to everybody? And if it's only for Christians, then this is clear bias. We're going to find that out with this lawsuit, and we're not going to make any bones about it. We're going to take it to them.
And you said you're still waiting for a hearing. Like, where are we with the lawsuit right now?
So I filed a lawsuit back in June of last year, and I asked for an immediate hearing. Now, for people who are lay folks and they don't really know how this works, when you file a lawsuit, usually what happens is you get a judgment a year, 2 years, 3 years later. That's how long the litigation can take. But if you have an issue that's very important, and if you wait a year or 2 or 3, people's rights are going to be violated in a significant way, you can say to the judge, I want a hearing right away because this is important. I want an emergency hearing on an injunction because I think it's so clear cut and the issues are so important. I want a hearing now. Now, I've filed lawsuits for issues much, much, much less important than this, maybe just involving one person in a significant way, and I've got a hearing within days or sometimes weeks. This issue involves hundreds of thousands or millions of people, fundamental rights, life and death, but the judge says, nah, I don't think it's all that important. And for, I don't know, was it 9 months or so? We're still waiting for a preliminary hearing, which shows bias to me against the whole issue. It's like the judge doesn't get it. So I filed a motion to disqualify him. He denied that too. I think this is clearly biased judging to suggest that this doesn't even warrant a hearing. The other thing, unfortunately, is that there was another case in Florida dealing with abortion rights filed by Planned Parenthood and ACLU. They got an adverse ruling in the appellate court, and the judge said, well, you know, we already tried this abortion case and it didn't work, and that's going in front of the Supreme Court. Let's just wait for the Supreme Court to figure this out. That could take years. Plus, the Supreme Court is ruling on a completely different issue. They're ruling on a right of privacy, which is already dead law. I'm bringing a case on a completely different grounds. If you're not a lawyer, you'll have to, well, I don't want to say trust me on it because I don't believe in blind faith, but the legal argument that I'm raising has nothing to do with Planned Parenthood. For him to say, well, let's just see what the Supreme Court makes of this other case, it's legal nonsense. It's just a way to delay and avoid making a decision on a case that's controversial.
Is there anything you can do to force the judge to hear, or do you just have to sit and wait?
Well, I've done it. I've filed about 4 or 5 different motions. I've made a complete nuisance of myself to the judge. So yes, whatever you can do without going beyond what's a legitimate argument. Yeah, I've done it. I've asked for a hearing probably 4 or 5 or 6 different times, and it's been rejected. I filed motions for reconsideration and things like that. Obviously, as an attorney, I can't just keep filing the same thing over and over again. So I'm doing what I can. I have filed a motion to take the deposition of Governor DeSantis. And I'm really thrilled that he wrote this book, because now I have a treasure trove of quotes and things from him that I can ask him about in the deposition. I also want to share with you something that I think everybody should know. Governor DeSantis normally signs bills into law in Tallahassee. He does that in his office in the Capitol. He didn't sign this one in Tallahassee, no. This one, he went to a fundamentalist church, and as the head of state, went to a church to sign an anti-abortion law. He's sending a message. The separation of church and state is over in Florida. He has no use for separation of church and state. Why doesn't he? Well, if you watched his campaign commercial that his wife made for him, on the 8th day, God required a defender, and that defender is Ron DeSantis, or I might want to call him Pharaonic DeSantis, because he acts more like a pharaoh than a governor. So it's obvious that he is dismantling the wall of separation between church and state. It's not incidental. It's in your face, and it's an intentional. And that's why it's so wonderful that Jews for Secular Democracy cares about this case, and they got it from the get-go. There have been many organizations that haven't. They understand it, and they're strong supporters of this litigation and of this issue and of challenging this law.
So what are the national implications of your lawsuit? Are there any national implications of your lawsuit?
Yeah, there's definitely national. First of all, my lawsuit was the first one to challenge the law on religious grounds. It's going after someone who's running for president as a defendant. Florida is a big state as far as setting trends for the country. So yeah, it has absolutely major implications. Now, there are other cases around, but I believe that this one is one of the major cases and it will have national implications. Let me just say this, and I was going to bring it up at the end, but let me just say it now. In my opinion, all the litigation over abortion rights on behalf of, from RFRA, from religious freedom, that are done by anyone, any case involving religious freedom, they should all be talking to each other. They should all be coordinating together. All the organizations should work together. We're up against really powerful forces. The last thing we want to do is to let each one go their separate ways. It's bad for two reasons. One, they might make arguments which contradict each other, and therefore they could be used against each other. And two, there's a lot of benefit legally to taking all the legal research and all the brain power and putting it all together and forming a master strategy. I've done everything in my power to make that happen, and I've got absolutely nowhere. I've been rebuffed at every turn, except for Jews for a Secular Democracy and a handful of other folks and individuals. But this is something that deeply concerns me. We all need to work together, and that's why this webinar is so important, because you have a lot of people from a lot of groups, a lot of organizations, and it's my strong desire to get everybody working together, because I think if we work together, we could be dangerous.
One of the things, I totally agree, and there are multiple approaches at this point, but one of the things I really fear is that if they're successful legally, they're all going to wind up in the same place, which is what I'm comfortable calling a Christian fundamentalist Supreme Court. And if, as they did in overturning Roe v. Wade, they basically don't care, they don't care, or the Kennedy coach case that I brought up, there's seems to me pretty clear and obvious things going on that they simply ignore because they want to push this Christian fundamentalist agenda. And so as meritorious as all of these lawsuits may be, if it ends up there and then they still do what they're going to do, what other avenues can we think about? I mean, I have some ideas, but I'd also love to hear
Paul, you raise a really good point, but there is something that I just want to point out, which I mentioned before, and that is the fact you are absolutely right. The United States Supreme Court can do whatever it wants. It's the court of last resort, and they can completely ignore the law. By the way, I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel that someone who's a self-admitted abuser of women, someone who brags about abusing women on radio, has no business appointing anyone to the Supreme Court. And any of his appointments should be stricken ab initio, because if you're an abuser of women, you have no right putting people on the court who are going to abuse women. But let me just share my thoughts on what you just said. The Supreme Court does do what it wants, but they've always considered RFRA to be extremely powerful. The Supreme Court considers RFRA sacrosanct. And like any RFRA case that comes before it, they rule in favor of the person whose religious freedom has been infringed. If they go ahead and do what you're suggesting, and I'm not saying they wouldn't, but it's going to be very difficult for them to do that. Because when you have a whole line of cases where the court bends over backwards to recognize the right of people to exercise their religion, and then a Jewish guy comes along, and that's why it's important that Jews are bringing this, I believe. Now, we have other religions too, but the fundamentalist Christians have like a sneaking respect in some ways for the Jewish person because their Bible comes from, if you have a Jewish guy who comes along, or a Jewish woman or whatever, a Jewish group that comes along, and you say, yeah, we agree with RFRA all across the board, but not for the Jews, it's going to be blatantly obvious. It's going to be hard for them to do that. I'm not saying they won't, but they might not. And if they do, it's going to point out blatantly the hypocrisy of the court. You use RFRA across the board, and now you have a fundamental violation of Jewish rights, and you're not using it. What's going on? I think if they did that, it would cause the Supreme Court to have a crisis of confidence in the people in the United States, and they would see how blatantly biased it is. And then I think other things might happen. Maybe people would be removed. Maybe they would have a reconfiguration. Maybe Congress would do something. Maybe the president would do something. I think I want to put it to them. I want them to go ahead and tell the Jewish people that we regard RFRA as sacrosanct, except for Jewish people. For you, it doesn't apply. I want them. I want to hear how they're going to defend that.
I hear what you're saying. I just fear the, something like 85 to 90% of Jews support abortion access. And I just can picture them going to find someone from that other 10%. And, like in the Woody Allen movie where he's like, I just happen to have Marshall McLuhan right here. And then he comes, you know nothing of my work. I mean, it's like they will find the one guy who says, oh no, abortion, we support anti-abortion as so that's my fear. They don't care clearly they don't care what the majority think, because the majority of Americans want abortion to be legal. So, but you did raise.
I know, but Paul,
yeah.
They're going to have a lot of splaining to do if they try to do this. And I believe this is our best shot. I'm not saying, oh yeah, we're definitely going to win. All I'm saying is this RFRA, which they use and they rely upon and they consider sacrosanct, this is our strongest, best argument. And if they reject it, it's going to cause all types of upheavals. And you'll see maybe the largest civil rights movement you've seen in a long time by people who are just going to thumb their nose at the court. And I hope that might happen, that people will start to reassess our confidence in the court. So I think this is our best.
I think it is an incredibly powerful advocacy tool, and I really appreciate that you're taking this on, because win or lose, you're raising the profile of this exactly as you're describing. This is discriminatory. And I think there is a value of fairness that most Americans would support. And I think that whatever the outcome is, if we could amplify that and say, this is so unfair, and frankly, just letting our Christian neighbors know that theirs is not the only view on these moral and ethical issues. And that alone could change the way people think about it.
Well, Paul, as you know, the ones who despise or are most concerned about the fundamentalist Christians are other Christians. They're appalled and aghast at what's being done in the name of their religion. And let me just say this also. We have a rise of anti-Semitism in this country. Criminalizing Judaism, treating Jewish law as irrelevant, is part of this effort to impose a white Christian nationalism upon the rest of us. When you criminalize Jewish law, that's anti-Semitism. Now, what I say is Christians have every right to adopt our Bible. They have every right to distort it and make it say something different than we intended. But what they don't have the right to do is to take our Bible, distort it, and then force it back on the people who wrote it and say, now you have to follow our misinterpretation of it. That's called legally chutzpah. They don't have the right to do that.
I want to jump in here because we have some really interesting questions from people on the webinar, and that related to actually what you just said. This is a question. In majority Christian areas, liberal Jews are seen as spoiler flies in the ointment. Might creating a reputation of Jews as abortionists foster more anti-Semitism? I'm going to direct that to you, Paul, and to you, Rabbi.
Go ahead, Paul.
Look, I've thought this as well in this initiative, Jews for a Secular Democracy, and we're just out there with the Jews. Look, if it's not for you and you're worried, don't do it. I'm a third generation Holocaust survivor. I knew my grandmother. You know, I never thought we'd be incorporating that into our regular conversation, or that all of our affiliated congregations in humanistic Judaism, and I'm sure at Va-Dor, if they're going to have like the high holidays and they expect more than 50 people, you are now notifying law enforcement, or you are hiring private security. Like, this is happening across the board in the Jewish community, and it's very scary. And yet, for me personally, it's not gonna shut me up. So everyone has to make their own decision. But I think that one piece is we know we have to stand up and speak out, because we know what happens when we don't. But the other thing I want to say is, despite the high profile aspects of the rise of anti-Semitism, which is definitely real, I will also say that anti-Semitism has been way worse in this country than it is today. I mean, there were times when you couldn't stay at a hotel if you were Jewish. You couldn't get into certain colleges. You know, you couldn't move into certain neighborhoods. It was way, way worse. And today, there's much less of that. Most people in America today know someone who's Jewish, if not have a Jewish relative, thanks to intermarriage, which I see as an overall net gain. We haven't lost Jews in this country. We've gained Jews through intermarriage, and we've gained family members who are not Jewish, who at least know one Jew. So it's harder to demonize a whole group when you actually know one person. You're like, well, Bob isn't like that. So anyway, I am less scared when I think about it in that way, but I understand why someone would be afraid of it.
Well, you know, I totally agree with Paul, and I appreciate your eloquence on this topic. I couldn't agree more, and it was very well stated. We should never allow people to say, oh no, what are the non-Jews going to think? We need to be quiet. Paul is very eloquent in that. Silence is the worst thing that we can do. All that takes for the triumph of evil is for good people to do or say nothing. It was Tuvia Bilski, the great partisan fighter, who said, freedom begins with an act of defiance. The whole point of being Jewish is to stand up against authority and to challenge the status quo. I say that's why we wear a talit. It's got fringes to show that the Jews don't hesitate to stand on the fringe of society when necessary to fight against oppression. So let them say what they want. If they want to say we're a fly in the ointment, so be it. I consider myself a rabbi rouser, and I consider Judaism to be the religion that is a fly in the ointment and does challenge injustice. So let them say that. That's only to our credit.
It's a great point. And I've also said this, frankly, when Trump became president, and I said some statements of concern, and I got some pushback just from a couple of people. And basically it was, why do we need to be political, right? And I think what you're saying, what I'm hearing you say is, you can't be Jewish and not be political. Being Jewish is a political statement in America, when at the same time you've got people, not all Christians, not even the majority of Christians, but you have many people in America who say America is a Christian nation, and it's not. There are Christians in America, maybe a majority, declining majority, but it is not a Christian nation. It is a secular government. It was established that way on purpose. That's what we're fighting for. And simply saying, I'm Jewish. Now, you can hide that. At least white Jews have the privilege to blend and try to deny it. And we know, I think we probably can all name somebody who's done that. But it's not an option for me personally.
You know, Paul, I'm so glad to have your eloquence to support getting involved, because when Moses told Pharaoh, let my people go, you know, a lot of Jewish people said, stop being so political. It's only making it worse. Now we got to make our own bricks. When the prophets challenged King David and the wealthy and the hierarchy, that's as political as you get. That's what it means to be Jewish, to challenge the status quo. It's only political. It's only political if I only criticize Republicans and I give the Democrats a pass. That's political. If I only save my rebuke from my party, that's political. But if there's somebody in government or a group in government who's destroying the planet, or who's recommending weapons of mass destruction, or who are subjecting women to an abuse of their rights, that's a Jewish issue. And to speak out about it is not political, and not to speak out about it is not being Jewish.
Right. And actually, and I know we're stuck on this one thing, but I just have to add to it that even if you are uncomfortable with it, with claiming that it's political, then I will say it's religious Judaism too, because Judaism doesn't anticipate, I would say even Orthodoxy doesn't anticipate that God is going to come down and make it all better. It's up to us to make the world a better place. And whether, you know, in liberal Judaism, we say tikkun olam a lot, but regardless, I mean, the most, and now I'm not a rabbi, but I believe the most commonly repeated mitzvah in the Torah is to welcome the stranger, because we were strangers. That's radical empathy, you know, standing up for the downtrodden. And if we are lucky enough, not all Jews are, but if we are lucky enough to be in a position of privilege, we are required religiously to turn around and try to help other people. And so if you're not comfortable with saying that we're being political, then we're just being Jewish, you know, as the rabbi.
By the way, supporting Israel, that's kind of a political thing too, right?
Well, that's another webinar.
I'm going to jump in.
Webinar. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. I've got a bunch of legal questions.
Okay.
I don't really know what they mean, so I'm going to ask you to explain them at the first grade level. Can you address standing for your case?
Sure.
Would a writ of, I'm going to just kind of say them all and then you can address them all. Would a writ of mandamus, I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it right, force a court date? What court is this hearing in? And what discovery has been done or will be done?
Okay. Read the first one again?
What can you address the issue of standing and how you're
standing? Okay. So before you have the right to ask the court to give you redress or to correct a wrong, you have to show that you belong there. That's called standing. So the court wants to make sure that you have some interest in it. Like if somebody hits another person and somebody down the street just says, oh, I'm going to sue that person because I think it was wrong. You have to have some injury. You have to have some standing to show that you have a business being there. Standing is used by the courts to keep out a lot of people and to shut down a case from ever being heard. So the thing is that there's a synagogue. We sued on behalf of our synagogue and also other groups, a Buddhist, a Unitarian, a doctor. Do you have standing? Do you have an interest in this? Well, and I sued personally also. So yeah, I have an interest in it because I could be arrested right now for advocating abortion and I could be put in jail. So yes, I have standing. My congregation has members who are of childbearing age who are affected by this directly, so they have standing. So standing really should not be an issue. It was in the Planned Parenthood ACLU case, but I don't think that was decided correctly, but that's what standing is all about, and we have it. Okay, tell me the next one again.
Writ of mandamus?
Yeah, writ of mandamus is when you get a higher judge to tell a political official or some official, you have to do this. It really wouldn't be appropriate because it's still within the court's discretion to decide when you get a hearing. And you can't just say, well, you know, I don't really like what this judge is doing, so I'm going to go somewhere else and have them tell my judge what to do. It's not really going to work. And the judge hasn't shut down a hearing. He's just taking a sweet time about it. So that wouldn't work out in this case.
Okay. What about what discovery has been done or will be done in working up this case?
Well, the other side is blocking any efforts for discovery. They're saying, well, it's not an issue yet, and we don't have to respond to anything. So they're not responding to anything yet. And I filed motions. It's on April 4, we'll find out about the deposition of Governor DeSantis. So there's been very little discovery taken at this time. What was the other one?
Okay. Do you have another one?
No, I've got a lot of other.
Well, the one that jumped out at me was about any federal legislation. So in other words, you had mentioned that one way around the Supreme Court might be for Congress to take action. I do know that certainly on the state level in states like mine in New York, once Roe was overturned, there was immediate legislation to protect abortion access. And it feels like, you know, frankly, sadly, it almost feels like the way the country broke apart at the beginning of the Civil War, where, you know, states are this was perhaps the intended point of the Supreme Court decision was we're going to break apart by state. Are you seeing things like that? Is there, I mean, obviously you can't do it in Florida, but are you seeing things on the federal level that might address this that way?
Yeah, it could be done. If you had a Congress that was in favor of abortion rights, you could pass something on a federal level or state by state, as you say. It's sad that you have to now fight this battle over and over and over and over in all of the states, and that we're wasting all this time on it. But yes, those are things that could be done if you had a Congress that was supportive. My dad used to say, if the opposite of pro is con, what's the opposite of progress? And then you kind of understand where we're going with this.
Right.
All right, what else?
All right, we had an interesting question. Mormons are not allowed to have polygamy. Doesn't this make your religious freedom argument difficult?
No, not really, because there's a big difference between polygamy and reproductive freedom and Jewish law. So the law does say that there's certain things that go beyond the pale, and we're not going to allow it. Even it's going to supersede your rights to religion. With marriage, that's true. Abortion rights doesn't fit into that category. Nobody's even suggested such a thing.
But it does get at that tension between the two clauses in the First Amendment, right? Because
it does.
The understanding of polygamy was this harms people, specifically the women involved, and the protection was for the women, not for the religious right of the husband. Who knows? If the way things are headed, if it was this Supreme Court that was deciding it, they may say, well, the husband has the right to have as many wives as he wants because it's his religious freedom, right? That's the tension. And up until very recently, it was the Supreme Court was adding rights, right? What I heard about overturning Roe, this is the first time that it removed a right from people. The history of the Supreme Court has been expanding who gets rights in this country.
Well, that's true, but according to the anti-choice people, they call themselves pro-life. I call them pro-lie, but according to the pro-lie people, you are expanding the rights of the fetus. Right. You see, we're looking at the woman. They're looking at the fetus. In Jewish law, the woman's rights take precedence over the fetus. To the other side, the fetus takes precedence over the woman. Why? Because the woman already had a chance to accept Jesus and go to heaven. The fetus is conceived in sin, and therefore you need to protect the fetus. And if you have a choice between the fetus and the mom, the fetus is going to win. The fetus I'm interested in are the millions of people who are starving around the world saying, feed us, and we're bringing children into an already overcrowded world. But you're exactly right, Paul. But the other thing is scientific. You see, the other side is saying, well, we're protecting the fetus, and then they say the fetus can feel pain, the fetus has a heartbeat, the fetus does this. Now, there was an interesting question that came up in the litigation with Planned Parenthood and ACLU in Florida when they were at the trial level, because the law in Florida is 15 weeks. Up to 15 weeks, you can abort. So the judge was like saying to the other side, to the state of Florida, well, if you're saying that life begins at conception, which is what they're thinking, the judge is saying, well, then why are you killing kids up until 15 weeks? What's so significant about 15 weeks? And they have a problem because scientifically it makes no sense. Also, the fertilized egg doesn't feel anything. So to suggest that from the very beginning, they're protecting the rights of a fetus, they're protecting potential life. But the scientific aspect of it is very interesting. And by the way, the scientists tell us that, and this makes sense, a fetus can't feel anything until the nerve cells are connected to the brain, because you feel something with the brain. That doesn't happen at 15 weeks, or even it happens much, much, much later on. They're not even sure when it happens, but it sure doesn't happen in the early stages of pregnancy.
It's fascinating, and it can extrapolate out in so many bizarre legal ways, right? I mean, even if you pick randomly 15 weeks and say, now that's a life, can you insure your fetus? Are insurance companies going to be required to insure a fetus, and therefore will all of our insurance rates go up? I don't hear any Christian fundamentalists advocating for that, right? But isn't it a life? Will you have to pay taxes on it as a dependent, or get a tax benefit as a dependent? Like, all of these absurdities of suggested, and that nobody's pushing for, it's just about abortion. And so, I mean, the thing that we're not calling out, that I do want to just also put on the table, is this is about misogyny. It's about control. I mean, we should acknowledge that we're talking about the separation of church and state religiously because that's where the law gives us an opening. But let's also acknowledge that this is about control over women and misogyny and all of these other things that have been with humanity for thousands of years. That is not so easy to overcome. But that's a piece of it, and it's
Paul, I'm glad you raised that, because it's a major piece of it. I just want to take 1 minute to emphasize that. When you ask a fundamentalist, how old are you? They don't trace their age back to the moment of conception. They trace it from birth. If you ask them to calculate how many people live in your community, they don't count all the fetuses as an entity. If you have a miscarriage, they don't perform a funeral service for a human being. It's not considered a human being in any situation other than when they're trying to suppress women. And you're exactly right. It's hypocritical, and it's done not because they care about the fetus. They don't. They care about suppressing women. And why? Because in the biblical story of Adam and Eve, you know why there was a problem, that Adam and Eve had problems, because they were raising Cain. But in the story of Adam and Eve, you have Adam, who has all these animals, and he says to God, they're really cool, but they don't do the trick for me. I need someone to do my dishes and my housework and stuff. And then as an afterthought, woman is created. So woman in that original story is an afterthought. And then evil is introduced into the world by a woman with the apple, which is a kind of a metaphor for sex. Paul is exactly right. These biblical stories are preaching and teaching and reinforcing misogyny, and we shouldn't hide that fact. And I'll just say this: these stories are all myths, and if you accept a myth as truth, you will be myth-led, myth-guided, myth-informed, and misogynistic, and that's what's going on here.
100%.
Right.
And as
This
Jews,
is
I was just going to say, we've been on the receiving end of the myths in the New Testament, right? That they've been using against us for 2,000 years also, whether it's women, whether it's Jews, like, it's all from this source material, which, even as liberal Jews, even I think religious liberal Jews are okay saying, we've changed. This is not written in stone, even if the imagery is of Moses writing it in stone. We have always been an evolving tradition, an evolving religious tradition. It's time for us to evolve out of that.
Thank you.
Katie,
Thank
what
you.
were you going to say?
I'm gonna jump in here, because believe it or not, we have like 4 minutes left.
Well, let's take like one or two more.
We're going to take some questions here. So we have several questions about how do we help? Is there a Christian group similar to Jews for a Secular Democracy that is supporting these type of legal battles? Are there other partner organizations that can help us hold the same beliefs? And thirdly, someone said, how do you propose the abortion advocates unite via your religious freedom argument?
Thank you. Here's the biggest thing that Jews for Secular Democracy could do. And I'll say it quickly. As I say, there's litigation going on all over the country. I can't keep track of it. But if Jews for Secular Democracy got some volunteers just to identify all the different cases and all the different attorneys and all the different groups, and get a group or a list and get it to me, or get it to, or you disseminate it, we need to bring them all together. That would be invaluable if we could all, I'm trying to do it, but it takes a long time to find all these. Somebody could do that, and it would help. The National Council for Jewish Women, which has spearheaded this charge, has nothing to do with my case. And in fact, encourage people not to get involved in my case. That's wrong. We need to get them involved in this case and all the cases. We all need to work together. That's what you could do. Get me a list of all the cases that are going on, and let's all work together. That would be invaluable.
We will reach out. We've had very positive experiences working with National Council of Jewish Women, and they have taken the lead on this in advocacy ways. Certainly, we just had Repro Shabbat, which they led all across the country. So they're doing good work on it, but there is always going to be challenges in organizational collaboration and turf issues and so on. So I hear you, and I agree with you that we need to find a way to unify around these, and that is, I think, a very important thing for us to be working on. So yeah, and I just put in the chat. Someone had also kind of indicated it, but I put the URL. Catholics for Choice is a fascinating group. I ran into their executive director during a lobby day. She told me that most Catholics in America want abortion to be legal, which I didn't know, and I'm glad to now know, and they are amazing. And also there's a group called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. So as you know, as Rabbi Silver said throughout this conversation, there are allies among Christians, and probably the majority, who are horrified by what's being done in their name. But they're not platformed in the same way as the Christian fundamentalists are.
Absolutely.
Rabbi, we had a question I think that's important. Please interpret the recent denial by a Miami judge of an injunction requested by clergy, including another rabbi who filed a similar religious freedom-based suit against the abortion ban.
Yeah, I haven't seen the decision, so I can't comment on it. I can't give an intelligent opinion, but that's one of the things that I'm saying. I'm just one guy, and I don't know all the cases that are going. There's cases all over. That's why I should know all about that. That's why I need to collaborate, and that's what Jews for Secular Democracy could do really well. Let's get a list, and let's all work together. Together, we are powerful. It's like a laser beam. When the photons are all focused in the same direction, they can do great things, and that's what we need to do. Focus all together, all the different groups together.
Well, it's just one guy. You've done a remarkable job of raising up this issue, getting publicity and advocacy around this issue, and getting, I'm sure, many more Americans to have at least some understanding that their religious worldview is not the only one among their fellow American citizens, and that maybe they should not try to enforce it on all of us. But I know that there's a long road to go on it. So thank you for all that you do. And thanks for everybody for participating. I know that we didn't get to all of the questions, and but this is not the end of the conversation. We're going to continue doing this work, and we hope that people will get involved in the grassroots level. And that is also something we've been working on. But thank you again, Rabbi Silver. It's been tremendous.
I just have to thank you for this webinar, and I have to thank you, Paul, for your eloquence on all these issues. I really am so thrilled to have you and secular Judaism on our side. Thank you for the ability to share these thoughts, and thanks for what you're all doing.
Great. Thank you all, everybody. We will email a follow-up. We have some links about Rabbi Silver's work that we also want to share with you all. So we will put that together in an email and send it out to all of you as well. But thank you all for being here. Have a great night. And there's still lots of work to be done on this. So thank you all for being allies in it. Take care.